Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ezibota chat for August. My name is Kirsty Parteng. I am the founder and executive director of the Nana Project, which is an online archive that's dedicated to preserving firsthand accounts of Ghana's history. I will be moderating the chat today. Our topic is preserving African history in the diaspora, ways that we can do it, how we can learn about our history while living in the diaspora. So now that I'm done introducing myself, I will let the rest of our panelists introduce themselves. Anakwa, you can start.
Sure. Hi, my name is Anakwa. I was born and raised in Ghana. I live in New York now, work as a journalist. And I'm very interested in, like Kirsty said, how we preserve our stories while we're on this side of the Atlantic. Excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Eula?
Hello, my name is Vilo Sweke. I am Nigerian. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and then I moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a part of the Ezibota team, and I'm very excited for this collaboration and also for the conversation that will ensue.
God's Grace?
Hi, I'm God's Grace Terapio. I'm the co-founder and producer of the Nana Project. I am a Ghanaian, born and raised in Northern Virginia, currently out of town though, but I'm excited to join the group and have a great discussion.
Thanks. Paulos?
Yeah. So my name is Paulos. I live in Finland. I was born and raised pretty much here, but I was born in Athens. And my background is from Kenya and Congo. It's very nice to meet you guys, and I look forward for this discussion.
Vincent?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Vincent Chukwemeka. Born in Cameroon, grew up Nigerian. Right now in the U.S. Work and live in the Midwest part of the U.S. So I've actually been a member when Ezibota started, and I'm a lifetime member. I'm proud to be one. So glad to have the Nana Project here.
I'm very glad to be here. We're looking forward to this discussion. I forgot to mention that I myself am a Ghanaian American, born and raised outside of D.C. in Northern Virginia, and I currently reside in Northern Virginia. So we'll get right into the chat. Our first question is, in what ways did your grandparents or other elders contribute or not contribute to you learning your country's history? So in other words, did we learn our history from...
Somebody just ran behind you.
Well, I'm going to say I'm a little interesting. I grew out without my grandparents, so my grandparents weren't really around. I had my cousin's grandparents who were around, so I kind of had surrogate grandparents through them. As we all know, it's kind of a community. Everybody's auntie and uncle and grandma and grandpa. So we were able to see them every once in a while when they would come visit or when we would go to Ghana, but my experience is a little bit different. So most of, what I've learned is just from my visits there and through my parents and kind of asking questions. So I kind of am lacking that link a little bit.
I asked my mom once how come, with all of the ways they tried to instill culture in us, history wasn't something that was ever really brought up. I was like, Mom, how come you never, took the time to ask us, to teach us about our history? And she was like, I don't know, it never came up. I was like, I mean,
that was the answer.
Yeah, I think I guess with everything else that immigrant parents have to do in raising their kids, making the food, trying to teach them the language, it seems like learning about the past is something that's, I guess, on the bottom of the ladder. I guess they focus more on maintaining the present and helping their kids, have a good future.
I think they also kind of expect that we're just going to know. It's kind of like that thing where you're just like, oh, without something that without having to actually tell us and spell it out, they just expect you to kind of listen and pick up those things here and there and really know what's going on. And then once you kind of tell them, like, oh, I didn't know about this, then they're a little bit surprised. And they're like, oh, you didn't? I never mentioned it? And you're like, no, never came up because you never really talk about it as often. So it's very much a prodding type of thing.
Did anyone else have any experiences with their parents or grandparents, aunts, uncles?
Yeah, just to go. Yeah, and Bila could tell you guys I say long stories, really long ones. But this is the beginning of the story. I mean, but I would say I do relate to both what God Grace and Kirsty said, and mostly is that part of. I think African parents believe, yeah, Max. Yeah, I think African parents believe that you need to be of a certain age to actually know the history. I think that is just a general belief. Like I realized that my mom or my dad never told me about aunties, uncles, or certain things about my village or my kindred or my clan only when I got to a particular age. I mean, the first time I did hang out with my dad was when I was 20, and that was when I was actually out of college, and that's the time I had the privilege to sit with him on Friday and listen to the 60s and 70s from Congo and the western part of Africa. And it's interesting because that's the only time I could actually sit with my dad, which is fun because maybe before then would have had like a real sit down thing. But I mean, we kind of connected in that particular realm. But there's nothing I can compare to 1999, the summer holidays of 1999. I was born and raised in Cameroon as a Nigerian, but 1999, I was sent to Nigeria to live with my grandma for 3 months because I was being stubborn in school. I wouldn't tell you the details of being stubborn, but I was stubborn. So the punishment was to go back to Nigeria and live with my grandma. But I would tell you there is no other. I think I was made from that particular year. I became who I am today because of that year. I learned things which I learned because of that year, and I won't go into the details because I apparently had just 1 minute. But I would say I had that touch, and that was the only touch I had. But it was awesome. It was great. So let me leave it at that before I go further. Villa is becoming weird.
I was laughing because you had just learned of your 1 minute max, and I know for people like yourself it's difficult. But I actually what Kirsty said really resonates with me. Like parents just expecting, like it's the same thing with language, Igbo. My mom never taught me, but then we go back home. She like, why don't she know the language? I'm like, where would I have learned, Mom? And so that's interesting. But with my grandparents, the language part is important because I couldn't talk to them. Like only my grandpa knew English, and so like when I spent time with them, I would just sit there in their presence. So they would be saying stuff, I'd be smiling like, yeah, but I didn't know what they were saying. So that transfer of information definitely would have been difficult. So
I think that's a really good point, the whole kind of language barrier. And I feel like it's a little bit different for some Africans, and kind of a similar thing where I don't speak, the languages that my parents speak fluently. And I understand some of it, but like you said, sometimes when you get there, they start talking to you, and you just kind of, especially when you're younger, you just kind of smile and you're like, yeah, sure. And they're like, what did I say? And then you're like, I'm not quite sure. So especially I get intimidated sometimes, so I start to second guess myself. But I feel like if we were to speak the language, if all of us were to be able to speak whatever language our parents speak, then I think it's easier sometimes for them to communicate with us and to tell us stories, or for even us to pick up those stories that maybe they're talking about with their siblings. But if we don't understand, then we're kind of losing part of that culture already.
So would you say that language retention is like an important aspect or a necessary aspect in learning our history?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a major part of your history. It's like, not even just Africans, but when you look at other ethnicities, other, nations that are, especially when you come to America, and I think the term that they use now is like, cultural erasure. When you're kind of making people let go of that part of you, it's such a strong part. I mean, language, it's how you communicate. If you're forcing people to give that up, then you're essentially kind of taking a really big step for them to give up other parts of their culture. So if that's how people, especially that's how people communicated, that's how they tell their stories, and you know, other stories aren't necessarily translated into English. How can you really understand? And some things don't necessarily translate as well. You know, there aren't some words for certain things in English or another language. It's just whatever it is in that language. So by not being able to speak that, you're inherently losing those things, like, automatically.
Yeah, and I think there's also an issue of identification in the sense that if you are speaking to your grandma or grandpa and speaking in the local language, speaking in that language, it feels a little bit more natural, like having those stories told than, you know, for them to be translated into English and, like you said, maybe not knowing certain words or you not knowing certain words that they use. And there's a little bit of a disconnect because the language is not just the translation, but it carries its own history and culture in a sense as well, you know. So I feel like language barrier is definitely part of it.
Yeah, because for me it's the same story. I have a grandmother and grandparents who live still in Africa, but the big problem is the language barrier because oftentimes, not always, most of the times they do not European languages that they speak in Africa, like English and French. And let's say they come from a city where most of the people will speak English, so these metropolitan languages is very hard to communicate without any other relative who happens to speak the same, let's say, tribal language, because oftentimes the tribal language is the language the grand. So first you have to break the language barrier in order to have the communication that like is able to give us perception of the history that they have lived in their time.
I had an interesting experience with my grandma in terms of passing down stories. So my grandma worked at the National Museum in Ghana for most of her life, and so I'd be in a situation where, you know, she would tell me all of this political history and things that have happened to the country, but not really much about her life in Ghana growing up and, like, you know, her family and what it was like for them when they were younger. And I think that it has part to do with, I want to compare it to like the Native American experience here of people who were put in sort of boarding schools to speak English and sort of forget about their original cultures. And, you know, eventually at some point you begin to, it's not that you don't value your original culture, but you don't think it's that's important anymore, something important to talk about, to pass down. And I think in some way, you know, colonialism is a little bit far back, but still I think elements of that were passed down so that it wasn't so much the individual lives of people that were interesting, but it was where, you know, where they had gone to school and the things that they had done and the sort of event in the country that they witnessed that became more interesting. But I at least speaking for myself, I've always found myself more interested in their actual lives and livelihood and family drama than the, you know, what else at the time.
I have a quick comment from the chat to share from Wasil that's watching us. Ezibota.com/chat if you would like to join. He said, my maternal grandfather was history. He was a king in one of the riverine towns in Lagos, so it was inevitable that we learned some of that from my mom and aunts and uncles. Outside of that, though, most of what I learned about my culture was from school. So we have royalty watching us. I just want everybody to be aware of that. And thank you for sharing that, Wasil.
I mean, I just to jump into that, just what you said, which is interesting, and I don't know if other people would relate to this, but if we go back into our cultures and the fact that the colonial administration, especially since most of us are from English-speaking countries, that means that it was the British and they had this indirect rule system. They created a lot of kind of artificial, traditional heads or chiefs, and it's always interesting because if I'm thinking about it equally. I could equally claim the royalty thing, but then I know that I'm sure my forefather in that distant past was just given that thing by another British administrator who thought that he had more influence than any other person. And that is an interesting part of it because how much of that influence, colonialism as well as neo-colonialism kind of affected our history today. And that's why I totally go with Anakwa. I really like the drama in the history than the history itself, because the drama was never touched by that particular, those facets of history. The drama of, Anakwa not liking, they are the Dwamena family not liking, Kirsten's family, or they're fighting for a throne, or Wasiu's family fighting. That drama was never touched by, the English people just looked at it and they were like, we're not going to deal with that. We're just going to choose ourselves a fake person and actually put the person there. So I think just reading about, I read about the Nana project and everything you guys are doing, it's always interesting to, see that particular side of the story and see how you guys are thinking about it.
Thank you. And I kind of want to jump to another question based off something that Anakwa said about your grandmother being a bit hesitant to share her personal history. Is that something that other people have encountered? I mean, honestly, in doing, trying to get people to sit down for an interview with the Nana Project, we do have people who are a bit hesitant, like sometimes they don't want to, have their face be all over the internet, or and other times they're not ready to share the things that happened in their past as it relates to Ghana's history. Now, and has anybody noticed any hesitance on the parts of our elders in trying to learn history from them? And then if so, like why do you think that's an issue?
I can take a little bit of that.
Well,
So,
for me at least.
Was
sorry.
that? No, go ahead, Paulus.
We haven't noticed any such thing because, for example, with my grandmother in Congo, when we went to visit her, it was 2011. She was more than eager to share her experience. But I think oftentimes the generation of our grandparents are exactly the generation who had to live through colonialism, which includes a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, and I think the trauma might be one reason, and the shame that makes it difficult for them to share those experiences, because they oftentimes might be very painful experiences that they still have to process, and they might have some psychological scars due to the experiences that they might have.
I agree. I think specifically for Ghana, just because that's the country that I can speak the most about, the people, I guess on the surface, think that our history has been very calm and peaceful, and I guess for the last maybe 20, 25, 30 years it has been, but in talking to people who were old enough to really remember when Ghana was the Gold Coast and to remember the fight for independence, and even the years after that when there were from 1966 to 1981 there were, I want to say, at least 4 coups, but I think it might be more than that. And so I think with how things are in the country now, and even I think for some countries, for some other African countries, it could also be said that because things are okay now, we kind of forget that once upon a time things were not okay. And so it's important, even though it's hard, it's hard to, if someone isn't ready to share their story, how can we, encourage them to do so? Because the way that things were back then, the Ghana of our parents, the Nigeria of our parents, it no longer exists. Is Ghana today, Nigeria today? I mean, the countries are different. They're radically different, and so it really only exists in the memories of our elders. So how can we, talk to our elders and encourage them to share their stories with us, even though there might be pain and trauma?
I mean, but your point, Kirsty, makes me think, and I can't help but draw a parallel to African Americans that share stories of enslavement, and there just seems to be such an openness, despite the pain and the trauma, and the current artifacts of that pain and trauma. So our discussion today is about preserving African history in the diaspora. So maybe it's different because we're not back home where things would be shared, more openly. And someone in the chat, I think Wasio, said that by nature he just doesn't think that African parents share that information with their children. but I'm not sure who said it. It was either God's grace or you, Kirsty. They're saying that they're preoccupied with so many other things. Like, for instance, I jokingly said that my parents didn't teach me the language, but they were getting accustomed to, like, American life. Like, sometimes I knew more about being an American than they did, and they were like my parents, and I was sitting here, you know, I thought I was teaching them, but, like, you know, just knowing more about the culture. So that's something that I think that we should be mindful of, and I think it's going to be more work, but that's why initiatives like the 9-Hour Project are so important and so valuable, because if not, it can easily get lost, and then we're going to be telling stories of, like, Independence Day and, like, stale hot dogs instead of the things that our children really, you know, should want to know.
Yeah, I think it's also a little bit that kind of the moments that we approach them. I think we have to kind of make sure that we're coming to them and asking them, and that it's not really like in passing, you know. A lot of times, so for instance, Kirsty was mentioning how we've had some difficulties with people interviewing them and, you know, asking them, and I can say, I mean, openly that a number of those people have been in my family where, you know, some of them, I think two of them were my parents, where it was like, they're like, oh, well, what is this? They're kind of hesitant about technology, which is, you know, I don't think it's necessarily even just, you know, Africans. Technology has grown so much in our lifetime that they're kind of like, okay, well, they're very much, at least Ghanaians are the people that I know, my family are very much like, oh, you know, you keep certain things, you know, to yourself, and you act a certain way in public, and you have to do this. So they're very much like, okay, you know, well, if you sit me down and you ask me, they'll tell me about it. But once you mention getting it onto the internet, then they're like, well, who's going to see it? You know, how long is it going to be up there? What is it for? What is this about? Even though I've already explained it to them. So I'm not quite sure if it's, you know, partially just technology, and then also, you know, one part just kind of approaching them in the right way and kind of creating that environment where they want to share. But then for some other ones, it's kind of, you know.
God's grace. I have something very quick to say. You say that it's like a fear of technology, but my mom will not get off Facebook. It is not that. She will broadcast any and everything. I am rebuking that excuse right now.
Well, I think it depends. I think it's the type of person, because my parents are like, my mom's the exact opposite. The other day, I think it was like 2 weekends ago, my dad's birthday, and I think my cousin was Snapchatting something, and my mom was like, she went into this whole sermon of how, I think it was, we were showing her a picture of my cousin who got engaged, and his fiance was, you know, had a ring picture, and she was just like, what is that? You don't do that. Why are you taking a picture of your ring like this? She just went into this whole, it's very, you know, very much, they're very traditional. So I think it's also, you know, the type of person they're coming over. They're very much, you know, old generation, where they're not having any of this new stuff. You know, keep yourself. You kind of have to protect yourself. And she's like, you don't know what other people's thoughts are and what their intentions are watching this. So it's really, you have certain different dynamics. So it's kind of like you were saying, how you were, you know, you felt like you had to somewhat show your parents the culture. I think some, you know, older people who are a little bit more traditional kind of reject that sort of culture, and they do what they have to, you know, on the internet. It's only up until recently that my mom is all over YouTube watching YouTube videos all day, but I think it's, I don't know, everybody has a different separation.
Yeah, and I think there's also has to do with the content, right? So my mom is also on like these WhatsApp groups with her friends from like middle school.
Yeah, I love that.
They're always reminiscing about like their old time, like their crazy things they did, you know, stealing chickens from the boarding school and all of that kind of stuff. And will occasionally, like, you know, share old photos, etc. amongst themselves. But you know, when I asked to like just reproduce a story like that for a larger audience, it becomes, wait, hold on, I'm stepping into a new position in doing so. I'm almost speaking in the context of a historian, perhaps, and there's a bit of a hesitance on their part to step into that role from there, because it's saying the same things, using the same tools, but it's a different position, a different like presentation of yourself. So I think that there is that hesitation.
Yeah.
Those two roles.
Maybe we just need to like basically steal their phones, or, you know, find them on Facebook, add into their little group chats, and then just kind of mute it and go in every once in a while so we can see what really happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe. I mean, just to my own point of view is I mean, I went to school totally back home, and I know that the history there was raw. I mean, I did what I did when I came to the US. So because I came to the US when I was quite older, so I came to the US and I went to like read a history book about Africa, and it was funny because it looked like it was some other continent they were talking about, and the whole idea was that fact of my premise is the fact that I think it is still so real. It's still so real for our parents and our grandparents what they went through for the everything which they went from colonization, as I said, neo colonization to me right now. There's something called entertainment colonization, which obviously we know what is happening with that. Light skinned girls are the ones only in videos, in music videos for our up and coming artists. To not no hatred to the light skinned girls or any other shade in our blackness and the beauty of our blackness, but just the fact that light skinned girls to white girls are on the videos, that is still part of it. That is still part of we not getting the fact that if that is what we show, if that is what our artists are showing, that means that maybe that's our culture. But then the question you ask yourself is people like us who are thinking about it, like, hey parents, I want this, I can't get it. Okay, I need to give my kids, right? The question, what I really want to see is our kids. I want to see what our kids will have to say about this in 20 years. What their kids will have to say about what we as grandparents give down to them. And I know we can't give them something that we don't have. But equally, it's always that part of it's if your grandparent or, for example, your grandma or your granddad was actually involved in fighting for freedom in Ghana and made enemies along the way, do you think your great grandparent would be very willing to actually talk about all of that, online? And I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying that this will stop everybody from saying something, but do you think they're going to say something and know that they are going to, in quotes, put you in danger for actually saying those and exposing those things about people? Because there are people whom I met while I was in Cameroon who fought for the independence of Cameroon, and they will just say things to you. In those days, we didn't have phones to record anything, but they will say things to you without any record, but they will tell you the truth of what really happened. So those are the questions which maybe we should ask, or I mean, I go back to Anakwa's point. What was all of those funny petty things that they had, like issues within the family? What was the family issue? And how did that grow? How did that make the family what it is today? But I think, yeah, it's true. Your parents, mine included, it's difficult for them to actually tell you really what really happened sometimes.
In the U.S., a lot of times I'll look at. So I like to call myself a diaspora junkie. I'm obsessed with analyzing diasporas and seeing how they relate with their homeland, how they relate with each other in their host country. I'm just a migration studies nerd, and so when when you think about diasporas from other countries, they're from China or from India. They've been able to do, in my opinion, I think they've done a better job of retaining their culture than some of the African diaspora populations. And I think really more just thinking a lot about the Chinese, and when there's the Cherry Blossom Day parade. They had the Chinese American youth group or something came and they performed their dances, and I know that the Chinese also have a lot of after school programs where the kids can go and learn about, I think, Chinese history and how to read and write Chinese and speak Chinese. And I'm wondering just the impact of colonization on the mindset of the people who were colonized and how that impacts how we learn our history or value our history. Maybe I'm making it too deep, but I guess maybe on the surface it seems like countries that were not colonized seem to do a better job of the cultural retention in the U.S. And it could also be that maybe, in regards to learning their language, I know a friend of mine from college, her parents didn't speak English because they speak Chinese because they're from China, versus my parents, they spoke English and spoke it very well. So when I came home, even though they would speak to me in their language, they would also speak to me in English because they spoke English. Versus if your parents are from a country that wasn't colonized, they don't have any other language to fall back on. So that's the language that you're going to speak at home because they don't have anything else to speak. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the interesting one that I don't really necessarily have an answer for, but just an example that you've mentioned about a group that does do a good job is India, but they were colonized by the British as well. So, and like you said, I mean, you're more of the, migration junkie than I am, so I don't know how long their colonization actually lasted. So it could, possibly have to do with that, but I think when it comes to that too, you're also thinking, more so, I guess, in the education system, because I feel like, at least, in Ghana, I feel like they teach English a lot in school, and they teach the other languages. So it is, and at least nowadays, from what I hear, it's very, on trend. People want to speak English more, to the point where I go and my cousins are telling me, oh, well, you'll go and you'll meet people who are born and raised in Ghana, and some of them don't even speak their language now, which I don't think it's like a huge group, but they're just so, they think English is the better language to speak. It seems so much better. So I think it's kind of in that colonial, neo-colonialism perspective of, what language you should be speaking, you're light-skinned or you're dark-skinned, and the education system, they're forcing you to speak English, and you have to, it's good for you to speak English. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but, you kind of get that erasure everywhere, in school and kind of at home.
I wanted to share a comment from the chat. Someone said, well, Anon5443. I don't want you to feel slighted, but that's not a username. But it said, Kirsty, you do make a valid point. We have been made to think that our stuff is inadequate, and unconsciously we have allowed that to seep into our consciousness. So that's I thought that was a great point. And I also want to just call attention to Paulus's new frames. He got new red glasses, and I think that he deserves. That's impressive.
We do that.
It's huge, but the anonymous person was just saying, Christy, that's a great point, and I think we've all alluded to that fact.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if it's like a common term, and I don't necessarily use it for colonialism, but I mean, the way that I refer to that is essentially slave mentality, where, you kind of have those things that have been ingrained in us from colonialism and, slavery that have become part of our unconsciousness, that we're, we have these certain perspectives. And like you're saying, you even go to the history books and, they're not telling our history because they don't have to tell our history how they wanted to. They kind of have always had that perspective of, you go to Africa and, it's, the bush and the village, and you got like monkeys and, lions flying around everywhere. That's just what people think that our life is. I think in high school, I literally had somebody come up to me and ask me if I had been to Africa, and I said yes, and he said, well, so, this was a black dude. He's like, so do you guys like, dance around the fire like topless? And I was just like, is that a serious question?
Mm.
He was like, I mean, I don't know, I've just seen stuff on like those channels, and I was just like, wow. I was like, no, I think my house in Ghana is probably nicer than your house here.
It probably is though.
I mean,
hey,
that we're living in these like mud shacks.
That's like shit of the century.
But I'm like, it's true, and I mean, I guarantee you that it is. It's just like, you go. Those videos that you see every once in a while popping up on Facebook, especially if you kind of are in the African community, of like, oh, the Africa they won't show you. And it's like, yeah, it's not like we don't have nice stuff there, but that's just the idea that is perpetuated in, our culture here in America, and even somewhat back home a little bit in Africa.
I just want to say, sorry, Christy, I just say two things that are pretty short. So on Twitter, like, a few months ago, because I don't use Twitter that much, but someone that I follow called Sad Black Girl said, I think more of us should be questioning the value spaces that are known for marginalizing us. And then what God's Grace said just called my attention to this quote that reads, until the lion tells his side of the story, the tail will always glorify the hunter. Yeah, Nakwa, yeah. So it's just kind of like, yes, like we can't expect these like white institutions to tell a humanizing story of like our people. It's just not going to happen. So that this is why I think that platforms like Ezibota, platforms like Nana Project are so important. They might be dismissed or seen as less than by like mainstream whitewashed platforms. But to me, I think that we're looking for different things. We have different missions, different visions. So I think what we're doing is laying the foundation for our children and our children's children that don't have to look to these white institutions to be humanized.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
If I had a white handkerchief, I would wave it.
I mean, it's a trivial, you know.
Hey, Paulus, you have to do the clapping thing, Paulus.
No, Kirsty, ask her question. I'm sorry. Anyway.
No, Kirsty, before you go, just 1 second. I just want everybody to think about it, and I think I've said this before in the chat. Beulah could actually remember, or Paulus. We need to, in some way, somehow, in the future, when all of you guys are millionaires, please, if you do have the time, the space in your heart, if you can do, because that's my project, that's something in my heart, do an African cultural center, whatever city you find yourself. If you have some other person who's interested in it, I know it may take some, resources, but equally, I'm sure out there in the United States, on state budget or federal budget, there should be some allocation for cultural growth or anything you could want to call it. You understand? And I know that the one thing you just need to know is how to write grants and just put your grant wall and be able to get that money. But if we talk and people maybe try to make up cultural festivals, which the Nigerians do really well, the Ghanaians do really well, and other countries do really well, but we don't have like established infrastructure and every other thing which we need. Wherein if a kid needs to actually learn how to speak Lingala, Swahili, Igbo, Yoruba, Kan, or any other language, they could walk into a particular room and say, I'm going to learn it on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and this is what I'm going to be doing. And, I'll learn how to dance, I'll learn how to do this. And we know that some dancers are doing it in the United States these days. In Europe, equally, they are doing, online classes and stuff like that. But we need those structures. And I'm just appealing to these millionaires who are actually in this chat. In the future, please, it's just going to take you like $1 million, just $1 million. It's not that much. But thank you.
Okay, sorry, Kirsty. I'm gonna let you ask your question. But I just have to echo it. Like, yeah, we really have to kind of, like you were saying, like take back that narrative and take back, like Vincent saying, these areas because, we have so many people, and I see it on so many sides. Like we talk about, what organizations, what press organizations we can reach out to. One of the most popular ones is OK Africa, which was started by 2 white women. And then you go to my sister who has kind of like an online shop that is focusing on African artisans and African designers that are within the diaspora. And, it is a struggle. But, yeah, you have all these other companies that are started by, white women or white men who seem to be doing so successfully in it. Or, different organizations. You go to a community center that might offer drumming. And you walk in there, and the person doing African drumming or African dance is like a white woman. So not to say that there aren't, Black or African people doing it, but there's just such a strong presence of white people taking that and trying to teach us our own culture, and we really need to take that back and do it ourselves because what better people are there to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna let you talk right now.
Wait, now you had a point, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in as well. That I think. To Vincent, going back even one step a little bit further back, I think that we have to, doing this and like projects like Ezibota and other projects are great because we have to start habits of actually like interrogating what it is, which is what it is our culture is, right? And like I can't speak for other places, but in my family, etc., like it's not always great when you sort of push back on what older people say or what elders say, but I think that having recognized the fact that the king that Vincent mentioned might have been someone who was placed in by a colonial system. We've been going for a long time thinking that this is our culture. That may or may not be true, but going forward, it's very important that we do have these conversations, that we do interrogate things to get a better sense of what culture is, and then moving forward, then we can have culture that is more connected to our real lived experiences and things that we've actually thought about, rather than culture that is, as you said, at a community center with someone doing drums, which is just African culture and sells, but it's not necessarily an authentic experience for people.
So related to all of this, saying that we need to take back the narrative, we need to essentially create our own spaces, which is something that I picked up from the founder of DAWN, the Diaspora African Women's Network. I just want to plug her. Her name's Semhar. She's a wonderful person, diaspora leader, and something that she really harps on is creating the spaces that you wish existed, and that's what we're talking about here. And so in regards to learning our history and creating these spaces, whose responsibility is it for us to teach or to teach the our history to us, or is it our responsibility to poke and prod our elders? Who is the onus on? Who are we? Who's the one that's really supposed to put the work in?
Is this for Africans in general or Africans in the diaspora?
Africans in the diaspora, or we could open it up to Africans in general. However you feel like answering.
Jesus went to the wilderness for 40 days before he started his ministry.
Right.
You like thinking?
What is going on? What
Okay.
is going on?
Now this is a point. It's very simple. In my mind, I'm just thinking, right? If you really want to know, why don't you just go to where you want to know? Go to the source. I mean, there's something called the source, and the source could be your village, it could be your town, it could be if your village became a town or a city. That means you have to just go to that city. But I believe they are storytellers, and they don't actually, wear a T-shirt that says "I am a storyteller." But you need to be in the environment to actually ask people who in this place is the oldest person. Basically, that's the first question you go to. If you go to if I want to learn something about the Gold Coast and the whole structure of being an Akan person or somebody from Accra. When I get to Accra, the first question is, hey, who is the oldest person around here? Who is that one really old person everybody knows that knows everything basically? And I want to talk to that person. I want to sit down with that person. I think I came with this idea came when, once I actually met the paramount chief of a particular tribe in Cameroon. And it was so interesting to finally talk to him because all the books I was reading were lying about his own family and his father and himself. Now, I read books about him before meeting him, and he was able. And in that case, it was not like he was trying to make the story look sweet, but at least he was frank about what happened. And then I realized that that's all about it, because at the end of the day, when I'm writing any other thing in the future, that would be it. I'll be saying when I was talking to this person, not that you may be able to meet the paramount chief or the king of every other tribe, but I'm sure there's somebody who is old enough to know a lot. And as I said, you need to take that particular, take up a week, take up 3 days, take up a number of days, go somewhere, go into that wilderness. It doesn't have to be wilderness per se, but I know maybe my allusion to the Bible and Jesus was not really the best way to go about it, but yeah.
I just want to share a comment.
I agree with it because
I'm sorry, Paul. This comment's like 2 seconds. I want to share a comment from the chat. Wasio said, "Christy, it takes a village," and he also said, "Collective responsibility. But to start, we need to be conscious." So I'm assuming we, as in younger people in the diaspora. That's from Wasio and the chat.
Yeah. And what Vincent said is true, because most of the history, it's written maybe not particularly by the Africans, because in Africa the primary way to tell history is through vocal stories, songs. So if you want to find out the history of your own country, is the book probably not the best source. Okay, there is a lot of written history, but most of it is like first-hand experience that you can only find out by asking the people who have been with the people who have told them the actual history that happened, because most of it has been written by outsiders.
I'm going to say that it's both sides. Everybody is kind of responsible for being able to preserve the history. And I'm going to go back to something Vincent said and put it in, different terms. Is, if you can't, if you can't take Muhammad to the mountain, like you got to bring the mountain to Muhammad, or I forget, but you know what I'm trying to say. Basically, like if they're not gonna come to you, you have to go to them. So if they aren't just openly just talking about those things, if they're not just those natural storytellers that are automatically talking about, oh, this is what happened when I was younger, or when this person became president, this is how it happened, and everybody was celebrating this way. We have to go and talk to them and ask them those questions and really, have an interest, like show an interest in learning and showing that you want to be able to, pass that down onto your kids, especially, when you live in America. I don't want to say run the rest, you're living in a country that's not your own, and you have a bigger pool of people from other cultures, people from other races, where you might not necessarily be marrying somebody of your same cultural background or your same religious background. And to some parents, that is important. You kind of do start thinking about the fact that, well, what are you going to be able to teach your kids? What do you know from your parents that you can pass down on to your kids about your culture? And how important is it to you to kind of maintain that history? So it really is, if you want to preserve that, you need to go to your parents and talk to them about that, or go in your attic or your basement and start looking through those old pictures and asking them, oh, I don't know who this person is, who is this person? Or just kind of even with going back to technology, preserving them by digitizing them and keeping them, and maybe creating books and keeping that history alive so that it's there for people to see in years to come.
And I know we've talked a lot about how trauma and other things can prevent our elders from sharing their stories, but there definitely are people who are willing. And so if you do go to your village, I asked my uncle in Ghana a few years ago about the history of our village and our family. And so since he lives there and he does go visit our hometown a lot, he went and he spoke to people, and he was able to give me a little write-up about the history of our village and how it was founded. So I just want to echo what everyone said, like, go to your village, go to the source, be proactive if it is something that you want to learn for yourself, and also, for your children. Even though, there are people who you might get a no, and that's just life, but I feel like more often than not, especially if it's something you're just going to learn for yourself and not, put on the internet like we're doing for the Nana Project, you'll get a yes, because I feel like our elders do want us to know our history and to stay in touch with our heritage and our roots. So, go try, go talk to people, and I feel like you'd be surprised by the things that they're willing to share. And Liz, also, you touched on something you said about with technology. So now everything's online, social media, lots of online organizations. How can we use virtual spaces to help preserve and share our history? The Nana Project. That's what we're doing now. But what are other ways that we can use virtual spaces to share and preserve our history?
Okay. Organizations like Ezibota, which are bringing together, community chats and bringing people together, creating those spaces to kind of have open conversations, talk about things, because it's also not important just to go and ask those questions, but to actually, once you get that history, you're sharing it, go back to your friends, talk about it, learn from it, kind of help pass along that story and kind of expand the community, so to say, bringing more people in, more people together, get people interested in talking through community chats online, Twitter, Instagram. You see it all over Instagram nowadays.
I just wanted to say something really quickly. So the Olympics is going on right now, and a conversation that a lot of people have is like how African nations suffer because countries like England and countries like America have all of the Nigerian, Ghanaian, whatever athletes playing for them. So it's the same thing. When we look at all the Africans that are lending their resources and talents and time to preserving other craft, it's very interesting. I feel like we need to have like a global renewal of appreciation for our culture, of appreciation for our history. It's not going to happen in our lifetime that this stuff is concrete and like that this stuff accomplishes what we want it to. But I really feel like we can be the ones that reawaken our consciousness and appreciation and start pushing our fellow researchers, videographers, whatever else to value what we're about as much as they value a check from these whitewash companies that don't give a damn about them. And I truly mean that. So like it starts with conversations like this, but then tapping into our networks and saying, look at all the stuff that you're doing for a check. And you know it's like bastardized and it's very like commercial anyways. So imagine how good your true authentic work would be. So yeah.
I'm gonna go off of that and also give a shout out to my friend who I'm staying with, because her little brother Olu is actually at the Olympics right now playing for Nigeria. He's a triple jumper. So yay to him. That's exciting if you guys are watching the Olympics. But he grew up here in Northern Virginia, not too far from me. But like Beulah is saying, it's such. Africa is such a mining country for Britain and like America. They kind of come in and they just pull all of our resources, and we've gotten to the point where we kind of just expect that. Like, we are so rich, but we're kind of giving all this away essentially for free. But so one thing I think that we really need to do is, young people like us, is think about going back to Africa, not necessarily saying you have to move back to Africa, become an expat, but, really kind of going back and contributing to their society, because the government and the system in African countries has kind of gone towards being more beneficial to outsiders than it is to us. Because even with him, I think he got his, like, their suits that they walk in for the opening ceremony, and it was like 3 sizes too big, and then transporting them from Nigeria to Rio is a problem, which I think Ghana also had a similar situation for the World Cup getting to Rio, and it's just like, why is that the case? So we really have to kind of go back to kind of taking things back to Africa and kind of giving our resources of what we know about technology, about infrastructure, and kind of getting our people in place, young people who are more active and who can get some of this power back from some of the older generations who might not necessarily be willing to let go of that American money that's not really, and it's not even enough.
Yeah, I think it's also, can also be as simple as sharing things on Facebook/social media, which have to do with our like respective countries or cultures. A couple of days ago was, I guess I'm not sure if it was like the birth anniversary and death anniversary of Fela Kuti. But on Instagram, all these people were sharing, resharing, and Africa. Oh no, not OK Player has been like making lots of Fela merchandise, and it's like Fela would not have been like appreciated being marketed like this. But this is who was sort of like sharing Fela's legacy and like sharing his stories, and we need to kind of like reclaim that as well, like reclaim those stories. And it could be as simple as sharing those things, or timelines, and starting conversations about who these people are and what they have meant to our culture and histories.
What resources have you all used in trying to learn more about your country's history?
Nana Project. No. Because I'm Nigerian, but everyone that's Ghanaian should definitely check out the Nana Project. I asked questions. So I was a little discouraged because I would ask questions, but like I would get met with like silence or just like, oh, we don't know, there's no documents. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, and also if anyone that is either watching on the chat or on YouTube or watches this in the future, you should definitely email either Ezibota or the Nana Project, because I'm just going to speak for the people that are frustrated, the people that have tried and like didn't find anything and kind of gave up. I just want to bring voice to that, but I am interested to learn what other people have done.
For me, when I go to Ghana, I make it a point to ask my relatives about what they remember about Ghana's history, and it was kind of from this that I thought like I should put something on the internet for everybody to learn about Ghana's history from the perspectives of our elders. because I thought the things they were saying were very interesting, but they were new to me, and I didn't know, like, maybe it was just because I was, growing up outside of Ghana. These are things that maybe you knew if you were in Ghana, and I was like, well, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who doesn't, know all these things that happen in Ghana's history. So I think, our family is a good place to start anyway. And then I also read the autobiography of Kwame Nkrumah. So maybe if there's a book that one of the leaders of your country has read, I think or has written, I think that'd be another place to start. And even books that are about those leaders, preferably ones that are not written by people that colonize these countries. But I know there's books about Patrice Lumumba, books about Nelson Mandela. I mean, Long Walk to Freedom, that's a book that he wrote himself. So I think looking at literature about our history, like an emphasis on literature that was written by Africans and not by colonizers, is a good way. And also fiction, if we're talking about literature. Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, my auntie in my head. I think everybody's auntie in their head.
She's actually my auntie for real, actually.
Being Ghanaian, growing up in the diaspora, I learned I felt so dumb not knowing that this happened. So as I was reading it, I was talking to my mom. I was like, Mom, did you, what about this war that happened? How come nobody told me? Like, how come I'm just finding out about this now? But she remembered everything that happened. She remembered when the leaders came to agree in Ghana, and they had, tried to have the peace accord that, unfortunately didn't work. She remembered the songs they would sing about some of the leaders, and she remembered so much. And I remember feeling so angry. I was like, how come? Like, why am I just finding out about this now? So just goes back, there's information out there. Talk to your family, read books if you can. That's my input. Does anyone else have any other resources you could use to?
Yeah, I don't really have a resource, but I have a word of caution. Just let us all remember the most exported, the most used medium of export right now for the African culture is through music. Mm-hmm. And our music, our dances are going places. Wizkid did a song with Drake, and Sarkodie did a song with that other guy who was rapping with him. I can't remember the other guy's name. Ace, that song is good. Okay, see, this is my idea about it. When somebody approaches you and be like, oh man, I saw a song by this person. Do you know this person? I think that is the first way we could actually, in somehow try to make sure people are getting the right message from our culture. And always tell them that it's not about the girls in the bikini, it's not about those other crazy things in the song, but this is what the person was trying to say. That's why for every single day I would like Sarkodie. Sometimes he has those girls, but his name is Bise Kedi. I don't know if I'm calling it well.
Yeah.
His songs, I don't know what they mean, but in my head and in my mind, he's saying something that makes sense. You understand? And I don't know what they mean. I don't know if that's you guys' best, portrayal of what the Ghanaian or the culture is right now. But, those are the people whom, I will tell you for Nigeria, please, Wizkid is so fun, Two-Face is for real, every single day. Just Wizkid, let him sing his thing and be happy. But after that, just listen to Two-Face to get yourself back into the mood. But that's the thing. I think we actually know the source of where we are getting our stuff, and we are working at it. See, the Nana project is one of a kind. Ezibota is definitely one of a kind. You understand? So we should always make sure we have those and support those. But equally, I think we have actually surpassed the level of learning at this moment. I think everybody here is at the level of teaching other people. I know Beulah always says that she's not all about trying to teach somebody if there's Google.
I'm not.
But I always tell her that since I'm my brother, I would always stand by her side and say that she could still teach. So when you are teaching everybody, please remember, make sure you let them know what the right thing is. Make sure you let them know where the right sources. Let them know that this the other part of everything that they see is mostly the entertainment part than the cultural part, because there's more to the culture than what all of the artists are showing them these days, which it's always weird.
Well, I think that is a great place to end the chat. This has been a really good discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as we all have. Before we go, we do want to issue a challenge to everybody that's watching, and also to everyone on the panel, to talk to, to find one relative that you at least think would be open to talking about their history a little bit, and ask them just one question about their past. It can be, what was your favorite song growing up, or what was your favorite childhood memory? And if they feel comfortable, you can, record it and tag us in it, and we can share it. And hopefully this can start a trend for people to see their family, their elders, as a resource for learning. And as Vincent said, then we can go on to teaching our history as well. So thank you all. You can check out the Nana Project at thenanaproject.org. You can check out Ezibota at ezibota.com. Yes, .com, not .org.
Yes.
Thank you. At ezibota.com. Continue using the hashtag if you want to keep talking about this. Hashtag EziChat. The Nana Project, our hashtag that we use for everything is our history, our stories, because it is that. It's our history. The history belongs to us, and there are our stories to tell. So thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is the end of the chat. Have a wonderful day. Be sure to cheer on your home country in the Olympics. Bye.
Woo, America!